Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries. It's New Year's Eve, deep in the 19th century Canadian frontier, and the Gatineau River logging camps are locked in ice. The men working here face months of back-breaking labor, with no way home until the spring thaw. For these homesick lumberjacks, the women they love and the families they miss might as well be on another planet. This map shows the gap they have to bridge, a 500-kilometer expanse between the timber camps and the warmth of Montreal. But walking this route means surviving deep snowdrifts, blocked mountain passes, and frozen waterways. It's a death sentence. Surrounded by nothing but snow, rock, and dense pines, the isolation begins to chip away at their minds. The physical cold is brutal, but the psychological weight of being cut off from the world takes an even heavier toll. When men are pushed to the limits of their sanity by a hostile environment, they start looking for unnatural solutions. They become willing to entertain the unthinkable just for a single mite back home. That geographic terror created a unique kind of vulnerability. The physical reality of the frontier was so bleak that trading away their eternal souls suddenly seemed like a reasonable price. The solution they turned to was an old story with deep roots. Back in Europe, the legend spoke of a wealthy nobleman named Lord Gallery. Because he skipped Sunday Mass to go hunting, he was cursed to ride forever through the night skies in a terrifying wild hunt. When French settlers arrived in Canada, they brought that aristocratic ghost story with them. Over time, as they traded stories with First Nations people, the nobleman's spectral horses were swapped out for the traditional bark canoes. To actually launch one of these canoes into the sky and run the Chasse-galerie, the lumberjacks had to strike a deal directly with Lucifer. All it took was a specific, unholy incantation: Acabris, Acabras, Acabram. But the devil's contract came with 3 specific conditions. First, steer clear of the ground. Second, never speak God's name. And third, avoid all church steeples. They were the tallest and most prominent landmarks in every French-Canadian village. These rules turned the journey into a moral minefield by making the holy symbols of their own communities the very things that will trigger their damnation. The pact ensures the men can never escape the oversight of the church, even at 10,000 feet. Imagine the raw terror of that moment. A heavy wooden craft filled with desperate men, groaning and unnaturally peeling away from the frozen earth to float into the dark. They paddle through the thin, freezing air, looking down at the scattered villages. The tension is agonizing. Every glowing cross on every steeple across Montreal is a lethal obstacle, waiting to condemn them to hell if their steering falters for even a second. But they make it. The Flying Canoe touches down outside a bustling house party, and the men step out of the bitter cold and into the music, dancing, and warmth of a New Year's Eve celebration. No one even questions how they arrived. They embrace their sweethearts and lose themselves in the festivities. Yet underneath the joy, a clock is constantly ticking. If they don't make it back to the remote logging camp before 6 o'clock the next morning, the deal is void, and the devil collects his due. The laughter and the warmth of the hearth only make the situation more terrifying. The better the night gets, the more agonizing the looming dread becomes, because they know they still have to survive the dark return flight. Back out in the moonless night, the men climb into the canoe and take off. Almost immediately, they realize something is wrong. The man steering the bewitched craft broke his promise to stay sober. He's been drinking whiskey blanc. The alcohol dulls his reflexes, and his grip on the paddle slips. The canoe begins to pitch and roll violently in the night sky, losing its unnatural stability and terrifying the trapped crew. The craft plunges low over Montreal, swerving at the last possible second to narrowly avoid smashing directly into the stone spire of a cathedral. Panicked by the near miss, the drunken navigator completely snaps. He starts shouting, stringing together curses, and crucially, taking the Lord's name in vain. Knowing the devil is listening, the crew erupts into chaos. To stop the blasphemy and save their own souls, they tackle their friend mid-flight, wrestling him down to the floorboards to bind his hands and gag his mouth. But he breaks loose, tears off his restraints, and screams another curse into the night. Distracted and horrified, the new steersman loses control entirely, driving the flying canoe violently into the trunk of a massive pine tree. The horror of the Chasse-galerie is built on human frailty. When impossible stakes are placed on imperfect men, the rules are destined to break. So what happens to the men? In the most famous 1892 telling by Honoré Beaugrand, Lucifer ends up being surprisingly lenient. The men wake up the next morning, battered and unconscious in a snowdrift, but with their souls miraculously intact. Other oral traditions were nowhere near as forgiving. In older, darker variants of the myth, the crash condemns the entire crew to endlessly paddle their ghostly craft through the fires of hell, screaming through the sky every New Year's Eve. Over the decades, this campfire warning outgrew the logging camps. It transitioned from an oral tradition meant to scare drunk lumberjacks into a defining piece of Canadian cultural identity. You can find echoes of the flying canoe everywhere, stamped on Canadian postage, printed on famous Quebec ales, and amusement park log rides, where riders sit in the devil's seat. The Chasse-galerie persists because it captures the anxiety of early colonial life. It serves as a permanent, chilling reminder that when you lock people in the deep, dark isolation of winter, they might just bargain with the devil for a brief taste of home.